It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. The guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
All right, kia ora, welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcasted weekly from a kitchen bench in Kingston, Auckland, New Zealand. Myself, Lewis, is the host, and I aim to bring you each week a different guest who I converse with over said bench about life, generally their life, their universe, and everything else. That's the sound outside, by the way. I thought I'd do an early morning record just to beat the sonic traffic this morning, but that appears to be the recycling truck following the regular rubbish truck. Can we just pause and have a listen to that? Oh, it stopped just then. Oh, no. Oh, no, it's a big bangy thing. It's a big bangy thing and the recycling truck. The big bangy thing is from the building site next door. This is field recording. This is what they call field recording. Anyway, chat about my guests in a second, but I just wanted to talk about the fact that there's often much to marvel at on your doorstep. This weekend, decided to go and discover bits of Auckland I hadn't before with my fishing rod, do a bit of surf casting. Decided to go all the way out west, but not to Piha, as is often the spot where you get taken when you're not a local, the spot you go to when you are a local and you want to stare into the water in contemplation. A little bit further down, an hour's journey from roughly the middle of Auckland. Stunning spot called Whatipu, Whatipu. A bit more remote than Piha in that the last part of the road in is, I think, 7 or 8k, it said on my GPS as I got to the gravelly bit. The gravelly bit that said no exit. The gravelly bit that about 4k in, I looked at my gas needle and thought, maybe I should have got some more gas before I left here. Anyway, got to the spot. Stunning piece of New Zealand West Coast coast. West Coast coast? Yes, West Coast coast. Beach. Kind of a slice of paradise, really. Didn't get jack with the fishing, but that's not really what it's about. It's a meditative process. Beautiful spot. Whatipu. And then by the way, I Googled it when I got back, and who knew that many years ago, I think early 1900s, locals from the area built a dance floor in the main cave there. I didn't actually even spot the caves while I was there, but apparently amazing caves close by. Built a huge dance floor, and from the late 19th century, for about 60 years into the 20th century, people partied in the cave. And had my next guest, or this week's guest rather, been around then, I'm sure he would have got to play some gramophone records at least once in the cave. It's a pleasure to introduce DJ Dubhead. Patrick to his friends. Patrick not to all of his friends until recently, as he discusses the social media unravelling of one's real name in the podcast. We also discuss his time at BFM with some hilarity and japes and malarkey concerning keeping the one like Mr. Mikey Havoc reined in, my guest from a few weeks ago. Pat was PD there for a period while Mikey did breakfast. Enough said, you'll hear the rest in the podcast. Before we get to that, tripod, hashtag tripod. I remember it, hashtag tripod. That's the hashtag in March. I think it started in North America for you to tell friends, family, fellow countrymen and women about the media form that is the podcast. They may have heard of them. They may not know exactly what they are. They may know what they are, but they haven't got around to ever listening to one. So it's time for them to try a pod. So if you'd like to post one of my episodes somewhere or forward it to a friend, hashtag tripod. Hey, you don't even need to do that, but if you want to forward an episode on to someone new, that'd be grand. More social media type, go virally type stuff at the end, please follow me on Twitter at Verbal Highs. On Facebook, it's at Verbal Highs Podcast. There's an Australian rap group going by the name of Verbal Highs who still have a Facebook page. I don't know if they're still a collective. But anyway, so Verbal Highs was gone. So at Verbal Highs Podcast on Facebook, at Verbal Highs on Twitter, verbalhighs.com is my own website. And also, if you could, go to iTunes. If you're not subscribed already, you can subscribe to the show. If you are subscribed, not subscribed, whether you are or you aren't, you can still go to my Verbal Highs iTunes store page. I guess it's a store, even though I don't sell anything for money. You can rate it, and there's 5 stars, and you just hover your mouse or your touchpad or your phone thumb ideally to the right of the 5 stars, to be honest, and give it a rating out of 5. That'd be lovely. Let's let the conversation speak for itself, literally and metaphorically. Ladies and gentlemen, for a bunch of years up until recently, he was known as the Sausage Guy. But more deeply, he's been known as a record selector and musician and radio show host, longest running show on BFM, a gentleman, a raconteur, Mr. DJ Dubhead.
This is Dr. Tannen's Verbal Highs.
What is your podcast and what are we talking about?
I can't tell you that. It's about Keynesian economics and the fall of the British Empire.
Well, it was all a failure, wasn't it? The Keynesian economics and the British Empire.
No, okay, look.
So I think you sort of said to me, it's about the music scene.
No, it's actually about whoever I get in and what they want to talk about. So I just thought, based on our talking we did for the sound system article, that, and also when we were out at the barbecue with Caps, and that was such a great night.
That was such a cool
night. Such a cool night with those guys. And you started talking about Auckland in the 80s, and then I started asking you about how basically the world's changed in that regard. We just talk about all of that. Yeah. But at the base of all of that, you know how probably when you've done little bits of press over the years and stuff, there's kind of stock questions and whatever. Yeah. We might cover some of that stock stuff, but I'm actually more interested in how you ended up out in New Zealand and kind of going back that far. Yeah. For those who've heard you on the radio for the last 25 or so years. So I've started recording.
Oh, good. Well, we're on.
So this is all I've got. And then it's an hour and 20 minutes.
I like it. You might have to do quite a bit of editing then.
No. I'll probably 1 or 2 minutes if either of us falls flat on our face.
Because I go blah, blah, blah.
No, good. And people, this is it. You've got it. I didn't even need to say any of that. It's just blah, blah, blah.
Right, cool.
Okay. So here's some blah, blah, blah. My guest arrived in New Zealand in 1969, played cello in Kiwi Animal, was in a gothic band called Silent Decree, started DJing in 1983, continues to host the Rhythm Selection, one of the 2 longest running shows on 95 BFM, a show he started in 1990, was also program director on the station from 2000 to 2004, may or may not be writing a book about New Zealand reggae, has written for Planet and Back to Basics, amongst other magazines over the years, has produced music under the moniker Sound Foundation, and currently we're coming in for landing now. Currently can be found mainly either at AUT's Monaco campus, running the AUSM office, or still continuing to DJ somewhere around predominantly Auckland. Now, most people are introduced by their birth names, but I'll just say hi, welcome, Dubhead.
Hi, Lewis. Good to be here.
Because I actually, you're quite an enigma online when you actually Google your real name, which is Patrick Waller.
I don't have a Wikipedia entry either. But people have only recently found out my real name because of Facebook's real name policy, which has been really frustrating because I've been Dubhead since 1983. All my friends know me as Dubhead. Everyone knows me as Dub or Dubhead. And there's only people from really the early 80s, or my family, that know me as Patrick.
So what bothers you that you didn't want people to know your real name? Witness protection? Or?
No, not... neither. Nothing to hide, and I quite like being a Patrick. In fact, I saw a great slogan the other day which said, "I'm not the patriarchy, I'm just a Patrick." But no, it was just the fact that that's my brand, and that's how I'm known, and that's how I'm known to everyone, and that's how I've been known for such a long time, that suddenly this Patrick Waller crops up on people's news feeds and they're like, who the hell is that? It's confused the brand. And now I even have people who've known me for years as Dub calling me Patrick. I'm like, it's because of Facebook.
Yeah, it's like how when you're in a room with Moo, someone can refer to him to Chris.
Yes.
And someone next to him who's known him for 10 years ago, who's Chris?
Yeah.
Oh, it's that guy there.
Yeah.
But, before there was Dubhead, there was Patrick.
There was Patrick.
And when I first met you, I actually thought your accent was mainly from the British Isles, but it's later on that you've told me there's an American connection. So basically, you got here in 69?
Yep.
Just explain a little bit about where you're from and how you ended up here, and I'm going to shut that door.
For sure. No, it is British. You're correct. And so I was 4 when I came over here, had my 5th birthday here, just a few months after arriving in the country, and then went to primary school here. My mum's Scottish, full Scottish. My dad, 3/4 English, 1/4 French. And the accent is English in the main. And I don't know why, but it just never went away.
Yeah,
I mean,
from like toddler age.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
I grew up in Maraetai Beach, but it just never went away. And people always ask me, they're like, why do you sound like a Pom? And I guess it's because when we learn to talk, we learn off our mum and dads. Yeah. So you mimic how your mum and dad speak, and it's just always stuck with me.
Yeah, but I like it because it's kind of like it's kind of to me like obviously the different sounding, but it's the same thing I like about. In terms of your association with radio, kind of Slave's voice, it's very definitely your...
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very definitely your voice.
Same with Stinky Jim, too. I mean, he has an English accent, but his accent is different from mine.
Yeah.
He's from Leamington Spa. I was born in Cheltenham, which is in Gloucestershire, so there's a slight Gloucester twang there. I did spend a year in primary school in North Wales before I came to New Zealand, and... there we had to speak Welsh because they're really staunch about their te reo in Wales.
Oh boy, that's an odd language.
Yeah. So I did at the point when I came to New Zealand, I spoke Welsh, but I lost it because neither of my parents spoke Welsh. There was no one else here that spoke Welsh, so it was gone. I'm
trying to think. Well, Welsh is like it looks like a whole bunch of consonants piled up together close to each other, doesn't it?
So, there might be a tiny smidgen of Welsh in my accent. There's certainly Gloucestershire in my accent, and possibly even a little bit of Scots, given that half of my family are Scottish. So when I went to, say if someone from the family was coming over to New Zealand, we would put on a kilt to go to the airport.
Right.
I kid you not,
Wow.
So the Scottish side of the family is very staunch.
And
they all have a Scottish accent.
Because I was going to joke when you said half Scottish, whatever it was, it's like you're basically like most Pākehā Kiwis then, but I certainly wouldn't rock a kilt to the airport to go and pick up some of the whānau, but there you go. So the music thing though, are both your folks still around, by the way? They're both...
No, my dad passed on 2 years ago. My mum's still with us. Now, in 1985, they left New Zealand and moved to California. My dad went there for work and opportunities. Basically, he doubled his salary.
Not like a Silicon Valley guy or anything by any chance?
No, not at all. Actually, he was a design engineer, but he was working for a New Zealand company called Gerard Roofing. You'll remember the terrible ads with John Rolls.
I do. Because my middle name's Gerard. So does that go for Oh, you just brought back something from my childhood when people found out my middle name.
So anyway,
it's actually Gerard. Everyone, there's no extra
Gerard,
R.
right?
Okay.
So he worked for Gerard Roofing, and they wanted to set up a plant in California. So he was sent over there to oversee the building of the factory and the installation of machinery, and he did it under budget and under time. And so the company were thrilled, and they said, "Look, you should stay on here as production manager." So basically my mum and dad have been living in the States since 1985. I was about 21, and my brother moved over there in 92. So all of my family live in America, but I've never had any interest in following them. So that they're all.
It must be kind of hard at certain times though for you, like your family being.
I don't. Yeah, no, I'm.
You're over there so often.
I go and visit them plenty, but it's also. I mean, my family's a funny thing. Like, all my uncles and aunts, cousins, grandparents, whatever. We've always been scattered around the globe. It's always been like that, living in other countries. Yeah. And I went to boarding school when I was 12. The moment I left boarding school at the age of 17, I went and got a flat and got a job. Yeah. So realistically, I haven't lived with my mum and dad since I was 12 years old. Yeah, so very used to them not being around. And like I say, then when I was 20 or 21, they left the country. But it was really no different because I only ever used to go home at Christmas time to see them, even when they lived in Maraetai.
He is the independent artist. So obviously 85 is a long stretch, so your mum stayed on over there.
Yep.
She's got your bro there and stuff.
Yep.
So where does the music thing come from? This is such a hackneyed journalistic music question, but I'm going to ask it. Was there music in the family?
Absolutely, and I think it's very valid too. My mum was a teacher librarian, and she was also primarily a music teacher. So she taught in primary schools when they were in New Zealand, and she was always the music teacher as well as the school librarian. She would be the music teacher. Yeah. So we were always, I was very interested in my parents' record collection as a kid. And I used to always tutu with the stereo, which would drive them insane. Yeah. And my parents were really cool. They had this little, in those days, you'd call it a travelling stereo. It was like
those briefcasey
things.
In
a briefcase thing, exactly, with kind of like a vinyl covering, and then the lid would open, and the speakers would be in the lid, and it ran off one of those big butty square batteries, the ones wrapped in cardboard. Yeah. So, and it also had an AC adapter, but it basically ran off battery, and because they got so sick of me always playing with the stereo in the lounge, they gave me this kind of picnic or travelling turntable, and then my mum gave me all her 7-inch singles and said, there you go, put that in your room and away you go.
You went and started doing block parties.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like I discovered, there were a few of those 7 inches of my mum's that I really liked, and I'd play it through, and when it would get to the end, I'd be like, again. So I'd pick it up and play it again from the start, and it's like, hey, wow, that's a rewind, but I was 8 years old. So I was 8 years old, but I was in control of my own turntable and my own collection, as it were, as well. Because even though my mum had given them to me, it was, by the time I was 11 or 12, I started buying my own records and so on. So I guess, in a way, I was a DJ in my own bedroom from about the age of 8. And of course, it pleased them because it really annoyed them, me pulling records out of the piles and sticking them on, and they were like trying to watch the news or something. You know what I mean? They're like, can you stop playing with that, please? Yeah. Turning the volume up and
pull it up.
So I've had stereo Nazi tendencies since I was very little. In other terms of music beginnings, like I said, my mum was a music teacher, so there was always she would always play piano around the house or acoustic guitar. She used to play folk guitar, and their music was quite they had different music tastes from each other, but my dad was really into sort of trad jazz and a lot of stuff like that. My mum was into blues and used to listen to a lot of stuff like Ella Fitzgerald and John Lee Hooker and that kind of stuff. So I was sort of introduced to a lot of music through them, but also encouraged. Like from about the age of 11, I started singing in a choir with my mum.
You still hit a note? I'm not going to.
Oh yeah, no, totally. Yeah, no. I love singing and dancing.
Yeah. Really? I would have picked you as a singer.
Dude, I'm the original singing, dancing DJ. Give me enough alcohol and a mic, and you won't shut me up. Yeah, good. So I started out singing in the choir with my mum. It was called the South Auckland Choral Society, and it was based in Papakura. And they used to do serious choral music. Yeah. Like a serious proper choir, reading sheet music from books and all singing, and I used to sing with my mum, which was actually a great introduction because we were reading music and singing. That sort of taught me to follow the notes, but because you've got voices around you singing the same note that you're supposed to be singing, it's really easy to kind of pick up where you're going wrong. Or, you know what I mean? You're singing,
yeah.
you sing along.
You're staying in the pocket with everyone.
You're not singing on your own.
Yeah.
You're singing along, and if you've got people's voices on either side and they're hitting the note properly, it's quite easy for you in the middle to hit the note properly as well, because you just listen. You're listening, plus you're reading the music. So,
You're saying to me you're kind of tuning your ear. You're getting...
Yeah, absolutely. And that was really good. As a kid, 10 or 11 years old, that was a really good introduction. And we did serious music. Like I said, I sung at a... every year they used to have a thing called the Messiah Singing. Now, the Messiah is a huge choral work by Handel, and they would get all these choirs from all around the Auckland region, and once a year they'd be in the Holy Trinity Cathedral with the Symphonia of Auckland Orchestra, and they would all sing this piece together, and it's a massed choir. I mean, I'm talking like 20 different choirs all together. So the whole cathedral is full of singers and an orchestra, and they'd been practicing it all year. So when you kind of come together, everyone knows their parts.
Must be quite powerful to be in there.
Just insane,
Yeah.
So I was doing that as a kid.
And nothing mic'd up, just the power of
and of course the natural
voices.
acoustics of Holy Trinity Cathedral, which sounded amazing.
So I'd imagine that 11, 12-year-old... I was going to say, should we say Patrick or Dubhead?
Still Patrick then.
Okay. 11 or 12-year-old Patrick, who said he was buying tunes at the same time, probably wasn't buying choral records.
No,
what sort of stuff?
No,
were you
well,
buying?
my mum had a lot of classical music, of course, being a music teacher and all of that. So she had a lot of choral music and symphonies and all that sort of thing. My first kind of foray into buying records was probably about 11 or 12. I had a real thing when I was still at primary school before I went to college. I really liked glam rock, and I think I got into that through my friend at school. They had older brothers, and their older brothers had really cool record collections. And so after school...
What sort of era are we in?
Well, I think I went to high school in 77, so I'm talking about 75, 76.
Yeah,
1975, 76.
That's kind of a sensible time to be into glam rock.
The stuff that I was really liking was like the Sweet and Gary Glitter Band and Slade and T-Rex and... that kind of thing, Susie Quattro, and it just really appealed to me, that sound that they had, glam rock.
Kiss too cheesy for you, I'm guessing?
Yeah, totally. No, never got into Kiss.
I do still like this. Is not Kiss related, it's Sweet related. That's Ballroom and Blitz, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
oh,
that's
man.
right. Yeah,
what a great record that is.
Yeah. But that was when I was 11. But the sort of the real genesis of my music taste proper didn't happen until 1979, and that was when I was in boarding school. I was in the 5th form at boarding school, and punk rock came along. And of course, in New Zealand, we kind of got punk a little bit later than elsewhere in the world, so it took a little bit of a while to filter through.
Stop you there, yeah, because almost Soviet-era times in comparison today in terms of access to information and media and so on. How does something like punk even get here if it's not coming through the mainstream channels? Is it just the occasional person coming back from overseas and the hip record shop owner? How does a countercultural movement make it into the New Zealand of 79?
I'll tell you exactly how I found it, and that was through Barry Jenkins.
Hauraki.
Actually, after Hauraki, he was on 1251 ZM.
Yeah.
And I think it was 10 till midnight or something like that. It was very late at night, but in boarding school I used to lie in my bed in the dormitories with my little plastic transistor radio sort of squeezed to my ear under the pillow so it wouldn't make any noise.
Wow.
And listen, and I used to listen every night. And it was basically the stuff that Barry was playing that just, turned me on, and that was everything. It was fantastic, Wire and Swell Maps, all the Rough Trade bands, and just so much exciting stuff. Plus, when I was at high school, it was boarding school, so I was living with a bunch of boys who were older, and it was a couple of them in particular, one of whom was in a band who liked punk rock as well, so you'd sort of go down to the shower block or whatever, and he'd be blasting the Sex Pistols or the Ramone or the Clash or something, and he'd be like, oh my god, what's this sounds great. once
It's lucky you're at boarding school with kind of people hip to it, you know.
Yeah,
you
well, I mean,
you could have been in a very different, I don't know,
well,
situation.
dude, it was a tiny minority. I mean, seriously,
Yeah.
the only reason is because this guy played in a band, he was really interested in music. And so because of that, he was interested in punk. If he hadn't been a musician, there was no one else there into punk. And
Were the rest of them like, what the fuck is this shit? Or were they like...
no, well, they were indifferent. But the rest of them were listening to...
It's good, at least you weren't oppressed.
No, but I was absolutely one out of hundreds in being into punk rock. They were all listening to Genesis.
You were slightly esoteric.
And the usual Led Zeppelin and David Bowie and just all the regular kind of music from the 70s, especially the Eagles. Nowadays, whenever I hear the Eagles or Genesis, it kind of conjures up dark memories of my time at boarding school.
Well, I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry to hear that, because if there's any two bands that you just can't escape for the last 40 years, it's probably
the Eagles
Genesis
or Genesis.
Eagles.
That's right. And you couldn't escape them when I was at boarding school either.
I don't know how many times they're going to repackage that Eagles Greatest Hits and give it a different name and a different cover.
But so that was the thing, and for me, so at the age of 15, it was my year of doing school cert. I was 15. It was 1979, and I was at boarding school, and punk rock, it totally changed everything. Like, it really did. The Sex Pistols, they mattered so much to me, and the Jam and the Clash and the Stranglers and just all of those groups coming through, and that was when I started buying records in earnest. And also, around about the same time, I discovered reggae as well.
Yeah.
Amongst the sort of first kind of 20 or 30 albums I bought, there was Toots and the Maytals' Funky Kingston, and there was Bob Marley, African Herbsman, and stuff like that.
Because it's a well-worn history, the reggae punk connection in the UK. But was that just intuitive on your part? You didn't know that the Clash were banging around with,
I think it was apparent in the Clash's music that they were reggae fans, and it was groups like the Clash and especially the Specials. Like I can actually point to one song, which was "Message to You, Rudy" by the Specials. That came on the radio, and I think I was probably 14 or 15, and it came on the radio, and I loved the horns, and I especially loved the trombone solo, which was Rico Rodriguez playing trombone. And interesting, because Rico Rodriguez had played the trombone solo on the original Message to You, Rudy, and then the Specials had recruited him to do it again on their version.
Didn't know all of this.
No. But it was cool that it was Rico, who by then was an elder Rasta musician, playing this trombone. And when I heard that on the radio, I'm like, this is amazing. It was especially the horns that really attracted me. I'm like, this is fantastic. I love this. So, it was through groups like the Specials and the Beat and the Clash that really kind of got me interested in reggae.
It's interesting. This is an aside to that story. It feels like a lot of the more mainstream stations in New Zealand then were actually allowed to, depending on the DJ, actually play a greater selection of music, right? Because I don't think you'd hear the equivalent of something like that now.
Possibly. It's arguable, though, because remember back then the commercial stations were playing commercial music, and they very much focused on top 20 or top 40
where were you
stuff.
hearing that tune then?
I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
Probably Barry Jenkins, even.
Who was on? Who was on?
Yeah, albeit a late night show.
Yeah, late night show. Yeah. But I'm saying I don't think you can rifle through the hard drive on a late night show on the equivalent station today and just pull out what you want.
Yeah, and I mean the cool thing about New Zealand, since we're talking about radio, is that radio did have to reflect what people were buying. And people in New Zealand have sometimes bought some really weird things. It's true. I think the only country where Bob Marley has had a number one song on the pop charts has been New Zealand.
Yeah.
I
didn't know
not
that.
the R&B charts, not the reggae charts,
yeah.
the pop charts, number one. And same, Sugar Minot had a number one song in New Zealand.
I didn't know
Good
that.
thing going. But
Really?
it was number one on the pop charts.
That's
ahead of Phil Collins, ahead of,
Have you seen that meme going around it's not really a meme, it's a screenshot. I think Harry the Bastard posted it the other day of the UK pop charts at the moment.
Oh, yes.
It's that's not a parody. That is
no,
reality.
that is. It's
all gone.
Ed Sheeran is the whole thing, except for like one song. But and again, things like Dead Kennedys, Too Drunk to Fuck, that got on the top 10 in New Zealand. Joy Division, Love Will Tear Us Apart. that I think was the number one best-selling
that's
song,
probably,
and it's like
that's
really
more
that
of
doesn't
a pop tune than Too Drunk to Fuck.
But still, you wouldn't expect to hear it
No.
on the radio. You see what I mean?
No.
So it's like, to a degree, commercial radio has had to follow what people are buying. What people buy in this country is, frankly, sometimes weird. You know, which is cool.
What do you think that is about us down here?
Small population, totally small population. You know,
And so
if
maybe
we had 20 million people, Bob Marley would never get on the top 20.
right. And
you know?
are you saying that's because one person gets onto a tune or an artist or whatever, and it's easier for it to kind of impregnate the population, as it were? Or
I think what it is back then, to get a song on the top 20 pop charts in New Zealand meant you only had to sell like 200 copies.
oh right.
Do you see what I'm saying? Because
Yeah.
in terms of overall sales for that week, given that the charts were a weekly thing and they were
Yeah.
based on record store returns, you didn't have to sell a whole lot to get on the charts.
Yeah. So what do you do? You're amassing all these under your bunk at boarding school. You're amassing all these tunes. What do you do when you leave school? Do you straight away go, how do I turn this into something that I can do, quote unquote, or do you go off and do a few other things? And how does the music thing play out once you get out of boarding school?
Well, the other thing is, while we're still at boarding school, I really got into music and I studied classical music. So I played in the chamber orchestra and I played in the orchestra and I sung in the chapel choir.
Is that the cello
Yeah,
thing?
cello. And learnt music theory.
Yeah.
And all of that, which actually sort of really stood me in good stead for things that I would do later on.
Yeah.
You know, it was actually a really good grounding to understand written music and things like tempo and key and all of those kind of foundational things.
Yeah.
And it was really good for me to be able to play in a chamber orchestra and stuff like that.
Wow.
You know, it actually, I'm always really grateful that I had that training, you know, and that I left high school being able to play an instrument and being able to sing properly and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So when I left school, basically I was 17. I'd finished 7th form. It was my bursary year. I wasn't interested at that time in going to university because there wasn't anything that really grabbed me. I kind of looked at what was available and I thought about architecture for 5 minutes, but I'm like, nah, I've been in boarding school for 5 years now. I've been basically locked up in an institution.
Yeah.
I need to bust out.
Yeah, good on you.
And I got a holiday job. Left at the end of the year in December. Straight away, I managed to get a holiday job at a record store in Queen Street. So this is the end of 1980 or 1981. And 256 Records in Queen Street.
You must have exuded something special, because I'd imagine a lot of people come off the streets back in the day and ask for a job in a record shop. I'm serious.
Yeah, well...
It's like, yeah, sure, we'll take your CV.
Yeah, I don't know. I totally wanted the job, that's
They're
for
like,
sure.
That's what I'm saying. They leave, he goes, this guy's as sick as me. I better hire him.
And also, by then I'd listened to Barry Jenkins a lot. I had a very good idea of what I thought were good bands, and I was reading the NME. So by the age of 17, I had very good music knowledge, and I was a record buyer, remember? So I knew what was available. I knew about imports and all of that sort of thing. So, so I got this job, and it was just supposed to be a holiday job. And I don't know what happened, but I think someone who worked in the shop left, but basically they kept me on. Yeah. And that was it. It was just an ideal first job for me. So
totally.
Basically, I left boarding school, I got this job, I moved out of home almost instantly. I think I stayed there till Christmas, and then the day after Boxing Day, I got a flat or something like that. So I had a job in the city, working in a record store, got my own flat.
So often when you're leaving home that early, it's like a tension thing. But everything you've just described, it sounds more like you're just quite an independent dude. There was no like, I'm out of here.
Yeah,
just
totally
spread your wings.
And I mean, I had a really good relationship with my parents,
Yeah,
and I think the reason I did is because for 5 years I'd been away in boarding school, so I only used to go home on Sundays. It was never long enough to have arguments, and they never had to go through all that normal teenage bullshit of me staying out late and not ringing up or not coming home, because essentially I was on lockdown, so they never had to worry about where I was.
You've been doing that ever since.
Yeah, totally. And then it was never like, oh, I think he might be on drugs. It's like I didn't live with them, so frankly they wouldn't know or didn't care, whether I was doing drugs or not. And then, like I said, the decision to go flatting, that was a no-brainer. Like I said, I'd been in an institution for 5 years. I wanted to be independent and do my own thing. So that was cool. That was a great first job. I had a staff discount on all the imports.
I was going to say, were you taking home any money in an envelope, or was it just turning into stock?
In fact, here you go. I used to work 40 hours a week, but a bit more than that because I would do Saturday mornings as well. So I'd do a late night Friday and work half a day on Saturday, like till lunchtime. And my take-home pay back then was $90 a week. After I left that job, which was after about a couple of years, I went on the dole for a bit, or I went on the dole for quite a long time. But at that time, the dole was $50 a week. Yeah. So the comparison there is like, you're busting your ass working 45 hours a week and you're getting $90, or you're unemployed doing whatever the hell you want to do and the government's giving you $50.
But you lose your discount, Patrick.
Yeah, of course, you lose your discount. That's right. And bear in mind, my rent back then was about $20 a week. Yeah. So, out of that $50, I'd put 20 on rent and I'd have the other 30 to spend on food bills and fun.
So how do you figure out that putting records on can actually be a vacation of its own?
Well, I was actually led into that by essentially by Mark Phillips and Peter Ehrlich. They set up a club called A Certain Bar. Yeah. And at that time, I think when I had that first job in the record shop and I was 17, there was a group of older men in the scene, especially around Queen Street, who were kind of running things. And those guys, I really looked up to them. And, they were quite a bit older than me, but they were the guys running the music industry.
Peter, you mean Peter and so on?
And I mean, I'm talking about Murray Kamek, who ran Rip It Up at that time. And he employed friends of mine at Rip It Up. People like Troy Ferguson, Russell Brown, Chad Taylor. They all done their time at the magazine. And Murray was just this really cool, laid-back dude who ran the music magazine. Yeah. The number one, the only music magazine, if you like. Yeah. And then just across the road from where Rip It Up was, you had Simon Grigg, who was running Propeller Records at the time, and he was also really influential on me because he was touring New Zealand bands and, had a whole kind of a scene around him. And then, of course, later on started up the whole nightclub thing in Auckland, and then Mark and Peter. And I think my very first flat that I moved into was with a girl called Karen, and at the time, she was Mark Phillips's girlfriend. So consequently, I got to hang out with Mark and Peter. And again, they were kind of quite a bit older than me, but they were really, really encouraging. And especially,
that's good. I like it when older people are that rather than assholes.
Absolutely. And I've always remembered that. And I always try to be like that myself too when I encounter young musicians or young DJs or any young person who's kind of finding their way. I'll always give them that because it made a huge difference to me. And especially with the playing music. And of course with A Certain Bar, they were DJing there and they were playing music that no one else was playing in clubs. It was very much a unique thing. Prior to that, nightclubs in Auckland were strictly disco. Yeah. And it was pretty much strictly a Brown thing as well, the disco. When they came along, it was a whole different thing. And they were playing all of these groups that we saw in the NME, groups like ABC and Haircut 100 and
I'd imagine the disco thing prior wasn't even that really dusty finger crate digging disco. It was probably quite mainstream disco.
Correct. Yeah. SOS band and Daz band and all that sort of thing. Yeah. So their Mark and Peter and their idea of a club, which was A Certain Bar, was really unique, but it had a whole scene around it. There was a group of us who all used to dress really weirdly and read the NME and really liked that particular music. We were buying the records that they were playing. And I was really lucky because I was friends with them that whenever Mark and Peter needed to have a break, which usually meant going out the back with Simon Grigg and disappearing for half an hour or so, they would get me to jump up and play records. Right. And so I was actually kind of like, well, we know you can do this, jump on and do it. And it was a great introduction. Because
so you were the fill-in for nefarious activity.
Correct. And I know Simon DJ'd at A Certain Bar as well at the time, not kind of like really permanently, but he was there and he also used to play records. And then I think he went away to England and bought a whole lot of records and then came back and started up the whole, what was it called? The Box and
Box,
Cause Celeb and all that kind of stuff after he'd come back from England with a couple of crates of amazing dance music. But it was those guys having faith in me and just saying, listen, can you jump up and play a few tunes? We're going to take a break. And it was great. You know, it was never like I want to be a DJ. They were more like, well, you know, you can do this. And shortly after that, I actually got my first proper DJ gig, which was at a rock and roll club called King Creole's, which was underneath the Civic, actually right underneath the Civic in the basement. And I used to play on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights. Which, if you think about it, in any nightclub,
I was just about. I wasn't going to say.
That's the night before payday, so everyone's
yeah.
broke, and it's Sunday night because that's the night before Monday.
Yeah.
So
Sunday nights back
basically,
then.
they were dead nights.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the guy was like, "Oh, listen, you know, you can come and play whatever you want." And I think his idea was that I'd kind of bring my own crowd, which to a degree I did. It wasn't a big crowd, and they weren't big spenders, but I did bring my own crowd to a degree, and I had the house crates of records. To call on, plus my own selection of music too. So that was actually my first sort of proper DJ gig.
And where are we now? Early 80s? 83,
yeah, about 83,
82?
I think.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about King Creole's is the resident house band that played there on Friday and Saturday nights was Tom Sharplin and the Cadillacs, and they played strictly 50s rock and roll. And the resident DJ there at the time, who played the Friday and Saturday nights, was a fella called Russell Rock, who went on to become much better known as an actor called Russell Crowe.
Right, yeah. I was about to say who's.
So I didn't learn any skills from Russell because basically I wasn't there on the nights he was on, and he wasn't there on the nights that I was on.
You knew each other.
But yeah, absolutely.
So if you saw each other now on the street,
Yeah.
you'd actually be, hey, is it that?
I doubt he'd remember me, but I mean, in fact, when I was working in the record store, he would come in with his singles. I Just Want to Be Like Marlon Brando was the name of a particular 7-inch that he'd produced, and like, go figure, he did end up like Marlon Brando.
He produced, was he a singer as well?
Yeah, he had a band.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and well, I mean, back then he was a DJ, but he was also a singer.
Right.
So he'd made this record, and he was trying to sell it himself. So I remember he would come into 256 Records and try and sell us these 7-inch singles that he produced, you know. So, I doubt he'd remember me.
You weren't really feeling the record, I'm guessing.
It was rock and roll. It was, a nostalgia thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But really, I've got a lot of love for Mark Phillips and Peter Rilich because not only did they encourage me, but I also followed them through their successive clubs, which were things like the 6 Month Club and Keys. And then after Keys, what was it called? Zanzibar, and they had Berlin. So after a certain bar, they kind of continued that, and they moved locations, but they always kind of kept the same ethos.
But you've never, like, in the sense of a club, you've never been a dance DJ.
No, correct.
So what were they having you play?
Well, when I was first started filling in for them at certain bar, it was the kind of stuff that they were playing, which was, Dixie's Midnight Runners, James Brown, all sorts.
Yeah.
Anything.
You can dance to that.
Anything goes, But I think as time went on, I got more and more into dub. And in fact, it was while I was at the record store that I first started buying dub records. And then I was like, this is what I want to play. I want to play reggae out. And, at the time I was in bands. I was playing in bands, but they weren't reggae bands, Right. The Silent Decree was a gothic punk band.
Yeah.
The Kiwi Animal was kind of like an art folk band.
Yeah.
All acoustic.
Yeah.
So the DJ thing was always kind of like a sideline to that. I had a musical outlet for singing or playing instruments, and then I had the DJing thing kind of on the side. And it was always, from the early 80s, it was always dub and roots reggae.
Do you ever pick up an instrument now?
I haven't for a while.
Is there a cello at your house, Patrick?
Yeah,
there is? Oh,
yes,
that's
there
awesome.
is.
I had no idea. So, away from you for a second, but still very much around your kind of story and around Auckland, what was the Auckland and the New Zealand of the 1980s, in and around the music scene, but wider? How was that compared to now?
It was a really exciting time, and I don't know if it was because of my youth and wide-eyed optimism, or if it was a really exciting time. You know what I'm saying? I don't know.
I've had people say it to me. It was a very exciting time.
there was a lot of venues and there was a lot of bands. And
Benny Stables talked to me at length about the whole early 80s post-punk.
And we used to go out to the venues to see the bands. I mean, that's another thing. It didn't matter. All the people who were in bands used to go out and see other bands. You see what I'm saying? And there was just all these great different venues. The Reverb Room, the Rumba Bar, the Windsor Castle, Main Street, the Glue
You think
Pot.
people stay at home more now because of social media and the computer and so on and so on and so on?
Yeah, and I think also, for people who were interested in post-punk or, the sort of music, alternative music that was covered by the New Musical Express, that was where you were going to sort of get your entertainment.
Yeah, totally.
Apart from a certain bar, there were no other clubs playing that interesting sort of music, so you had to go and see bands. That was. But we did have great bands in the city at that time. There were just so many bands, and I guess being in a band myself, you kind of tend to gravitate to other people who play music as well. So you sort of hang out with a bunch of musicians, and new bands were constantly forming all the time. So there was always new bands to go and check out. Oh, I've heard these guys. Oh, so and so's playing with these guys now, and so you'd go and check them out. And
But you were telling me that, like, wider society-wise, it was more likely you'd get booped on the head back then than you would now.
Absolutely. I mean, Auckland was a very dangerous, violent place.
I think New Zealand was more so back then, from what I've heard of Wellington as well.
There was street kids, who basically would intimidate you, and what they wanted to do was rob you, essentially. They would want to take...
So different to the homeless buzz now, which is just kind of sitting around low-key.
I mean, I'm sure a lot of these street kids were homeless, but they wanted your sneakers or your wallet or your leather jacket, anything they could sell, basically. And then there was the skinheads. And because I kind of dressed like a punk and hung out with a lot of punks, for some reason the skinheads didn't like the punks. And I never quite understood that, because in theory skinheads have a lot more in common with punks than they do with the rest of society. So I'm like, why do the skinheads always want to beat the punks up? It just doesn't make sense,
You're at home going, why?
Why?
But the skinhead thing's always confused me, because it's a term used interchangeably between, the UK here, wherever, between kind of good skinheads and white power shithead skinheads. Like, I still don't understand that. Isn't there a skinhead movement, or wasn't there a skinhead movement in the UK that wasn't like that?
Yeah, well, the good skinheads started in the 1960s.
Yeah.
And they liked ska music.
Yeah.
They liked Jamaican music.
Yeah.
And they weren't racists.
Yeah.
And they weren't fascists.
Yeah.
And then as things went along, by the 70s and the 80s, that whole National Front right-wing element crept into the skinhead movement.
And it spread to New Zealand, obviously.
Yeah, I think so.
So where were these guys from? Just guys from around Auckland?
Yeah, I guess so. And I mean, the thing is also, if you look back in the 80s, gangs were a really big thing. And I think gangs gave people security. So, the King Cobras were big. The Mongrel Mob and the Black Power, they were big organisations, and they had strength. And I think the thing is with the skinheads is they were a gang. That they were kind of tough white guys who essentially, if they were on their own, were going to get a hiding like me and my friends did.
Yeah.
But if they got together and said, hey, we're a gang and we call ourselves the skinheads, then they had the power and the strength to be able to sort of stand up to other guys. But unfortunately, that whole gang mentality meant that they spent most of their time going around ruining parties and gigs, and they were just terrorising innocents.
Yeah.
It wasn't people they had a problem with. They would basically turn up and just cause havoc.
Sounds like a bunch of guys who needed a hug.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I mean, a lot of them ended up in prison. A lot of them ended up dead.
Yeah.
And the remaining ones kind of, I guess, got married and had kids and settled down and bought a house out west and a Holden, and kind of grew their hair. I figure.
You're saying even the police was more of a gang of sorts then?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there was no police brutality. It wasn't a thing then because we expected the police to be brutal. I mean, given that most policemen were also rugby players, there was a real thug element in the police, and there wasn't any political correctness. If you gave the fingers to a cop or called him a prick or something, he'd punch you. As simple as that, you know. No, but no, I mean, really,
Would
as
they
simple
ever
as that,
just-
because
would
it was
some of
that
them-
old style
Yeah,
of policing.
yeah.
In that,
Look,
you know, you've got a young kid who's 17 or 18, he's being lippy.
Yeah.
You can either arrest him or not arrest him, or you can just give him a fucking clip and tell him to go home. You know, it's
So
that
bizarre,
simple.
eh?
Save yourself a whole lot of paperwork.
Save
Give 'em a-
yourself,
yeah,
save
exactly.
yourself some admin.
Well, exactly, and you're going to tie up the whole court system and everything.
yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
give him a hiding, and then he won't get smart the next time. You know, it was kind of the theory behind that.
Maybe I'm kind of warming to that now. There's no paperwork, but no. But no, I mean, look, it sounds like it's probably a lot more relaxing for you these days walking home from a gig.
yeah, absolutely.
So
And-
you think this
And to be honest, I was not. I've never been one of these afraid people. I mean, I had a crazy fucking haircut, and I used to wear really crazy clothes,
Yeah.
and I'd get on the bus, and old ladies would yell abuse at me, or people
Yeah.
would stare at me, or
Yeah.
people used to yell shit out of car windows. Get a haircut!
Yeah.
Oh, look at the freak! But I never. It never stopped me from walking places at night time. I was not afraid. I was more just wary. In the early 80s, we were wary, and if you'd be at a gig enjoying a band playing in a pub, and then the skinheads would arrive, and you'd be sort of like, uh-oh. So you just keep your eye open and watch for the first sign of trouble.
it's
You
not
know,
relaxing.
wait for that jug to
Yeah.
start flying, and then duck. Because it was going to come. Once the skinheads arrived at a party or a gig, there was going to be trouble. But you were wary of it.
You say early 80s, but I was even amazed. Oh, I'm going to carbon date this. Must have been late 80s, at the very latest, early 90s. I don't know if you remember this or you've seen it, but the beginning of the Shehad doco, there's some footage of that band early in their career. And some of the footage of the bar they're playing in looks like prison yard behaviour. You know, so what's happened? I mean, we're creatures like any other. Have humans just evolved? What's changed? Because I know there's still assholes out there, and there's still people doing asshole things, and we're
Yeah.
still, humans are humans. But what's changed?
I mean, do you watch?
Is it all getting bottled up, and everyone's going to pop?
No, do you watch these clips on YouTube? I mean, really, I think Australia is way worse than New Zealand. It always has been for street violence. England has always had a lot of rough and tumble. It's tied to alcoholism, and testosterone. Macho bravado, fighting is a kind of thing that drunk males seem to get involved in, and I don't think it's changed that much in New Zealand. It's got better, but I don't. I saw a clip just last week of Hamilton, and it was like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
The club had just closed.
Yeah.
All these drunk people spilled out onto the street. In Hamilton, and there were security guards having full-on
I saw
brawls with
that.
people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And then the next thing, the police come in, and they're all involved in the brawl as well. And it just seems like there's 20 or 30 guys on the streets of Hamilton early on a Sunday morning smacking each other over. And I'm like, well, there we go. Not much has changed since the bloody 1980s,
Yeah.
really, has it?
Although it seems things. We'll wrap this part up shortly.
Yeah.
It seems there is a bit more segregation of worlds, though, because I certainly didn't grow up in a world in Wellington where at the parties I'd go to I had to be wary of people like that. Oh, actually, no, hang on.
Yeah, maybe you did.
We had what we called the homies then, who occasionally would turn up
homies.
to parties and
that's what I was
rough up the place.
And that's what I was saying about street kids.
Yeah.
We called them street kids.
Yeah.
But it was the same
Yeah,
type of
okay.
characters, and they might want to rob you or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I got to say, I'm like you, Lewis, and I've never been a fighter. I've always thought fighting was really stupid. I'm not a tough guy. I don't have any fighting skills.
Yeah.
So at the first sign of trouble, I would get out the way.
Yeah.
Has always been my thing. Is
Yeah.
like run away.
Yeah, don't start
because
singing.
Then,
Don't
then,
start
then
playing
you're
the
not.
cello.
Then you're not going to get
Yeah.
clobbered. If someone threatens my masculinity and wants a fight, I'd be like, what for?
So we go from you're starting to get gigs and so on, but how does this? You wanted to start playing, particularly Jamaican music fundamentally. How does it turn into the Dubhead moniker?
That came about actually in 1984. There was a full-page article in the NME. See, the NME keeps coming up in this story.
Yeah.
A very important magazine.
Yeah.
There was a full-page article in the NME in, I think, March or April of 1984, and it was profiling the Mad Professor, who was really just kind of starting to get attention at that time.
Yeah.
He had started doing stuff, I guess, in about 81 or 79, but he was getting attention because he'd started his own record label, had his own recording studio, and the title of the article was Crazy Dubhead. And at the time, because I was starting to get booked for gigs, I needed a name. And initially, I'd kind of thought Dub Freak would be a good name because I was a dub freak, right? But then, on thinking about it for 5 minutes, I thought, no, the freak connotation is not too good. Calling yourself a freak means then other people are going to call you a freak. And yes, I am a dub freak, but I'm not a freak. So then I saw this article, and in big, huge, bold letters, it said "Crazy Dubhead," and I was like, that's it. That's me.
Nice.
I'm Dubhead. Brilliant. And of course, I was a big fan of Mad Professor at the time too, and I was playing his records, and so, yeah.
Did you see Neil when he was here for the show? You played at it, didn't you?
I played support for him.
And how was it this time round?
It was excellent, actually. He's still got it.
I'm sure he does. Because, even last time... last time I saw him when I was aware of what he was doing would have been late 90s. I've seen him since then in Australia, where I was just audience. But he was doing this mad show where it was all super VHS tapes. That's how he's running different tracks. So this is such a boffiny question, but I need to know the answer. How's he running the different tracks in the show now? Surely it's not still tape.
No, and I know for a time he did use 2 ADATs, which were synced up.
Yeah.
So, ADATs is like 8-track DATs.
Yes.
And he'd have 2 of those, so he'd have 16 channels of information. But nowadays, it's all digital. But he's still mixing the separate tracks.
He's still on an analog to digital desk sort of thing.
Yeah, so he's still, except it's probably strictly a digital desk, but he's still live dub mixing, essentially.
From hard drives.
And I presume that he's using... whatever it is, Pitch Black use, Ableton Live.
Yes.
I'm guessing he uses Ableton Live, so he's got all the stems as separate channels, and then he mixes them live.
And welcome back.
No, it was a good boffin question, and relevant, the Mad Professor, because I played support for him on his very first tour of New Zealand, which I think we decided was... I thought it was 92. He said 94. Yeah. So he has a pretty good memory. So I'll go with 1994. Yeah. It was an orientation tour, and he played at the University Cafe at University of Auckland as part of orientation. And I think that was John Pell's first tour as a promoter. Yeah. And the reason John was able to do it was because it was orientation tour. The money was guaranteed. Yeah. Essentially, the student union said, we will pay this amount. Doesn't matter if people turn up or not. So
really large cultural element of a lot of campuses missing now, I agree, is some of the artists that were coming out through those tours. Yeah. Just nuts. Yeah. It's like I never would have seen... Yola Tango if I was just a chancer. Yeah. I'd go to everything, and no, absolutely.
And I mean, that's since 1994, Mad Professor's been back to New Zealand probably a dozen times, but I'm sure if it wasn't for John Pell and if it wasn't for the Students' Association at Auckland University, Mad Professor would never have come to New Zealand,
Yeah. So the BFM
so anyway, it was cool. It was cool playing support for him last year, or this year, or whenever it was. It was very recently.
I think it was...
Was it February?
Last few months.
Yeah, it was.
It feels like this year.
Yeah, and especially since it was, 22 or 23 years since the last time I'd played support for him, which was his first visit to New Zealand. It was really cool, and I went... Hey, Neil, how's it going? And he recognised me straight away. I said, it's Dubhead. And he was like, oh, great to see you, mate. I was just like, wow. Yeah. He hasn't aged at all either. No. I have a whole lot, but he looked exactly as he did 22 years ago,
So any part of your story was where you can talk, Patrick. We're up to 51 minutes.
Oh, we're doing good then.
Yeah. We're going to have to just quickly cap off the last 20 or so years. But I was going to say, quite obviously, any discussion of yourself and your music trajectory has to incorporate BFM. So how do you first end up walking up those stairs?
Yeah, absolutely. 1985 is when I first started hanging out there, and it was essentially through friends. And again, I would have met these friends through the music scene, basically from just going to gigs, or they played in bands. Particularly a friend of mine called Larry DeZuta. He was the drummer in a really good band called Flack. Yeah. And another friend of mine called Jonathan Roper, who was also a musician and had a show on BFM. And essentially, I used to hang out with them. Our common bond was actually skateboarding.
Right.
We used to skate together and hang out together and go to gigs together. And of
Were
course,
you a ramp guy or a street guy?
street guy.
Yeah,
Street
yeah.
guy. I was never any good at tricks. But for a long time, my skateboard was my primary form of transport.
Yeah, yeah,
So, because I never owned a car until recently, so I used to either skateboard or cycle around the city. So they had radio shows, and they said, "Oh, come up to BFM and hang out on our radio show," which developed to come up on our radio show and do a little dub segment. So it might be like just 20 minutes of playing some cool dub tunes as part of their show.
Yeah.
And I really liked the people at BFM. The people who worked there and hung out there were like really cool. And obviously it was a great...
Kindred spirits.
It was a great hub for music as well. So if you went to BFM and hung out, you would get to hear heaps of music. You'd get to meet other people who were in bands. And... I volunteered like anyone does at BFM. I helped out. I did things like, sticking the mailer into envelopes and licking the envelopes.
That's a dead detective,
because pre-email and everything, that was how you contacted your subscribers and people. You sent out 500 bloody letters and licked the stamps. And so I used to do all that stuff. And I was encouraged by people at the time like Dom Nola and Robert Southern and the people who were in the station management at the time to get more involved on air, but I kind of didn't want to. I don't know what was holding me back, because I was DJing at that time. So, I'd been DJing since 83, but so from 85 to 1990, I just hung out and helped and appeared on other people's shows, but I didn't
That's weird,
do my own thing.
Because you'd been performing, you've got the music, you've got a good voice for it, just something internally was holding you back.
We'd even, the Kiwi Animal, which was the band I was in, had a track included on a BFM compilation record, which was put out by Flying Nun. Outnumbered by Sheep was the name of that record. So I was totally involved in BFM culture, and I knew all the people that worked there, but I just, I don't know, I guess whether it's because I was working or because I was just busy with the DJing thing and being in bands, I never... But when it did happen, I remember when it happened, and it was 1990. Liz Tan, I think, was the station manager at the time, and she used to hang out a lot with Mark and Otis, OJ and Rhythm Slave, and around that time, we would end up doing shows together. Like, we would appear on the same bill often, so that's how I got to know Mark and Otis. They were still super young guys at Selwyn College at the time. But Lizzie T also used to hang out with Harold and the Hallelujah Picasso's guys as well, and Lisa Vander Aarde, who was the host of Freak the Sheep, she was the manager of the Picassos. So there was a little scene there, and I remember at the time I was working for Virus Clothing on K Road. I used to work in the factory, not in the shop, so I was doing the screen printing with Mike from Virus. Screen printing miles and miles of fabric.
Oh my God, those virus tops, that's such of a time.
There you go.
I was just looking at some photos online.
They've got one in the Auckland Museum,
Really?
Yep, as part of their permanent collection.
I was actually, someone posted up an old picture of them the other day, and I was like, it's time for a revival, I think.
Well, I probably printed that.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Lizzie T rang me up, and of course, I'd listened a lot to Duncan Campbell's, it was called the Campus Radio Sound System on Sundays, and that was a huge influence on me in terms of reggae. We all, the handful of us that were into reggae in Auckland, there was probably 20 of us back then, we'd all used to listen to the show religiously and tape it. You'd tape the songs that you really, and so we'd record his show onto cassette, and I got to know Duncan and sometimes hang out and sit in on his show and things like that. And so he'd basically rolled it from sort of 1980 through to 1990, and around that time, Lizzie T sort of wanted to sort of increase the amount of hip-hop that was on the radio and the amount of reggae. So this is 1990, because those musics were really coming through strongly, and the first dance parties were happening in Auckland, and reggae and dancehall and hip-hop were where it was at. So she rang me up and said, listen, we want to have another reggae show, and would you be keen to do it? And I'm like, yep, no problem, And I remember the first show I did, I really wasn't very confident with the desk and all the buttons,
hey, look,
right?
Come on,
because given that I'd never done a show on my own, I'd done shows with other guys, and I knew how to operate the turntables, no problem. But it was
plus you knew
but it was the desk was daunting, and So I asked Duncan, I said, Duncan, I've got my first radio show. Will you operate for me? And he's like, yes. Because I was, again, an older man who'd kind of mentored me and encouraged me to get into DJing reggae. And so he kind of sat in on the first show with me and pressed the buttons. And I think by the second or third show, I was okay to do it on my own,
Yeah.
And so that was 1990. And been doing it every week since then.
That's amazing. 27 years now, 26 and a half.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, you're an encyclopedia of the Auckland music scene that needs to be consistently mined, I think, because we're probably really, in the scheme of things, if we added it all up, only covered about a year.
Yeah.
And in total so far. Yeah. So.
Well, to continue on the campus radio story was
Yes.
I ended up going to work there in 1997, and I landed that one. Was actually really cool. Again, it was a period of my life when I was unemployed, and I was starting to get a lot of grief from social welfare, who felt that I wasn't making adequate steps to finding employment. And, of course, telling them that you're a part-time DJ and musician but not declaring your income doesn't sort of really... Probably even now, I hope the statute of limitations is passed. As far as I was concerned, I had a fucking job. I mean, seriously, I was doing a radio show. I was playing gigs 2 or 3 nights a week. I mean, I had a job.
Look, I don't know about up here. Maybe Auckland's always been legit longer term, but... even through, when did I start playing out for cash? 94, 95. The style then in Wellington was money out of the till, there you go.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Has the statute of limitations passed?
That's right.
Till I headed out this bit. Wins crackdown on podcast content.
But anyway, the cool thing was that I had a friend, it was actually my girlfriend's younger brother, who had got a job at the Labour Department. And you remember then that social welfare was a separate government department from the Labour Department.
I don't, but I'll take you for
So
that.
how it worked was the Labour Department was responsible for your registration as an unemployed person. They were also responsible for finding you gainful employment. All that social welfare did was pay the cheque and try and stop paying you. Right? Their job was to find reasons to cut your benefit off. But it was the Labour Department's responsibility to find you a job. So you can imagine how this messed people up, that you've got 2 separate government departments kind of fighting against each other. And I say, well, I've been to the Labour Department 3 times this week. Stop giving me grief.
And you can see why it was a disincentive, because the whole thing sounds like a day's work of just trying to get out and get it all sorted out.
But anyway, my girlfriend's younger brother got a job in the Labour Department, and he was involved in starting a pilot scheme. So this pilot scheme was a new idea, and they thought, what we're going to do is get unemployed people, put them into a job, we will pay 90% of their wage, and the employer can pay 10%.
So great for places like B.
Or 20%. Exactly. Now, BFM couldn't afford to employ an extra person at the time because BFM had no money. It still doesn't. That's never changed. But the fact that my wages could be subsidised by WINS or social welfare, or actually it was the Labour Department, sorry, not social welfare, they were like, great. And it also got me off the dole. So social welfare were happy because I wasn't on the dole. I was still being paid the same amount of money as an allowance, but it was called a work scheme.
And you were turning up for work somewhere where you didn't want to stab forks into your eyes. And
correct.
So what were you doing there, first off?
I was programming the ads. I'm what you call a traffic manager. So
there was enough work just doing traffic management?
Oh, no, that would be a few hours a day. The rest of the time I was cataloguing CDs for the library. So I was the music librarian, and I was also an assistant to the program director. So I was kind of like a music director. I was listening to music and that kind of thing.
And you know,
and so that
from
was
my days of working in student radio, it's like it's kind of like, yes, you're doing a job, but you kind of feel like you're just hanging out.
Exactly. And I mean, given that I've been hanging out at BFM since 1985,
You're legit hanging
this
out.
is 97, so it's 12 years later, I'm still hanging out at BFM. Plus, I've been on the radio now for 7 years as well. So it was home for me, and
Nice.
and it was cool. The money was small, the hours were small, and then it grew. And I think it was a 6-month block. It got extended by another 6 months, and by some sheer miracle, we managed to get it extended another 6 months
Right.
of the government actually paying for most of my wage. By which time I'd made myself indispensable, and then BFM put me on the payroll. That was up until 2000, and that's when I took the job as program director.
Can I stop you there? To me, that's like, I mean, mana's not the right word, but that's, from my mind anyway, that's a pretty darn exciting job to get, to be the person who decides on what freaking music gets played outside of DJ choice.
Yeah, and not just that, you get to decide what DJs get shows.
What DJs get
so
shows.
if someone's doing a shitty job, you have to sack them. Or if some
can you tell us-
DJ comes to you off the street going, I want to do a grime show, you have to decide if BFM needs a grime show or not.
Well,
you know?
you'd probably say back then, hang on, grime hasn't been invented yet, wouldn't you?
Oh, I don't
So
know.
tell us
Actually,
some of the...
97, I think it was kind of starting to become a happening thing.
Oh, it probably was, yeah, the UK hip-hop thing, and was it called grime
Two-step
then?
garage.
Yeah, it wasn't called grime then, though, mate.
It wasn't called... Okay. Two-step garage.
It's just the same thing. They just keep
Yeah, it
giving it a
is.
different
Yeah,
name, and they tweak a little bit of the bass frequency.
Yeah, and certainly there never was a grime show, but there was a two-step and garage show for sure.
Oh, who hosted that?
Well, Toby Jaffa did one, which was called Thunder and Joy.
Yeah.
And then also Jason Housen had a show.
Yeah. I love that stuff when it's
wasn't
done right.
His show, was it called Silk Cuts, or was that for another radio
that was for
station?
George.
That was for George. But
So
before
some
Silk
of
Cuts,
the-
he did something on BFM, I think, yeah.
So this is interesting because that's when I was away for that period, 2000 to whenever it was. But some of the hilarious highs and lows of that position that you maintained for 3 or 4 years.
I was the program director when Mikey Havoc was the breakfast show host.
Yeah.
And frankly, he made me sweat a lot. I used to have nightmares about Mikey. Like,
This
serious,
is
actual nightmares.
Is to do with the
Him,
time?
Yeah,
Clock.
correct.
Yeah.
Him never turning up on time and never playing the fucking playlist. You know, I'd get a hot new track. You know, some DJ like Timmy Schumacher or Jason Housen or Greg Churchill or someone would go, Dub, I've got this great new 12-inch. It just came in today. I'd listen to it and be all right, bang it on the playlist. Program it for the next morning for Mikey to play. Look, there's a brand new, you know, it's this artist called Cassius. You'll love it, Mikey. And he'd fucking delete it. You know, it wouldn't be until he heard Greg Churchill or Roger Perry or Nick D playing the song in the club that then he'd play it on the goddamn radio, you know?
This is such an
It's like, who the fuck are you to delete it, you know?
I appreciate your frankness. And you can't. I mean, like it's. Patrick, I've been affected by this topic with that weird role I did when I came back in 2007,
that's right,
2008. I had
You were the-
Mikey
you
in
were
a
the
few,
pre-Brecky
I had
guy.
Mikey in a few weeks ago here, and we hit it off like a house on fire. He's one of the most charming men to have in the room together and stuff. But I just don't get, how was it allowed to happen so long? Because to me, it's like someone who wasn't, you know, no disrespect to Mike if he's listening. I'm sure he knows what's up with all of this.
Absolutely.
It's like,
I mean, he knows I
it's
love
like,
him too.
Is it like to do with the metaphorical parent being the organisation of B not disciplining him early enough and him learning he could get away with this? Because it seemed to just go from quirky to completely ridiculous.
It's about, I think some personalities are larger than life, and
Yeah.
they'll always have a maverick outlook, and they'll always go their own way, for better or worse, but because they are stars and because they have a ginormous ego,
Yeah.
they will. I mean, can you imagine anyone trying to tell Johnny Cash what to do? Or for that matter, Nick Cave. Oh no, Nick, I don't think you should do that.
Yeah.
I mean, he would just say straight up, fuck off.
Yeah.
I'm Nick Cave, I'm doing it my way.
Yeah.
That's it. And Mikey was always one of those characters. You know, Mikey is an Elvis.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. He snapped his sundial sometime early on. Excitedly snapped his sundial.
That was a bit of a headache for me.
Yeah, you know.
But like I said,
jokes aside, what do you do? Like for people who don't know the hierarchy of a radio station, at least back then, because the PD role's increasingly changing, won't go into that. You are effectively the level of management above those roles, and he's in the key role in terms of your DJ team. So, what would you get him into the office? Would you?
Yeah, I'd ask him very politely and nicely, could you please play the playlist, or could you please not just delete all of it? Maybe you could play 1/10 of the songs that I've programmed in breakfast.
With the time thing, would it be like, would you guys offer him solutions? Like, have you tried getting up at this time? Have you tried doing this? Have you tried...
He lived on the North Shore, so he always used the traffic on the harbour bridge as an excuse. But basically, if he'd just left the house a bit earlier, he would have been there on time.
Some of the mornings I was there was stunning. It's like any station in the world. I think about quarter. People. It's earlier than people think. Like even with a indie station or whatever. I think 6:45 to 7:30 is your real peak listenership.
Yeah.
And so some of them, I think when I was there, I'd say to someone there, I have to go now to my real job because it's 8:20.
Yes, yes. Sorry, I've got to leave.
Quarter to 9. This thing only goes till 10. Anyway, some of the highlights of.
Oh wow, so many. Just the New Zealand music that I got to add to the playlist and shine lights on during those years, which was essentially 2000 to the end of 2003. So I'm talking about a 4-year period. I was the man. Believe it or not, when I was doing that job, I thought, this is the job from heaven. This is the perfect job. Yeah. I'm going to do this for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I really did think that. I had totally underestimated how much of my life the job would take over. Yeah. It's 24/7.
People management, music scheduling, music selection, music listening.
You go out to a gig and 20 people come up to you to ask if you've listened to their song, to ask you if they can have a radio show, to complain about a song they heard on the radio, or to complain about a DJ, to ask you why Mikey's late every morning. I mean, seriously, there was no such thing as me going to a gig. It would just be like having an audience with,
It's funny you say that, because when I had Dave Roper in here to talk about the end of his last round of promoting, that was it. He said, that's funny. So funny. That was the bit of it he said broke him in the end, was the not being able to be out and not be... I think the word he used was lobbied.
Yeah.
Just constantly lobbied.
That's right. Either it's good ideas or it's complaints. But essentially it's people wanting to talk to you about BFM, and it's like, hey... I'm not at BFM. I'm at a gig trying to enjoy the artist right now. I'm with my girlfriend having a drink. Thanks, But I essentially burned out. I mean, I loved the job, but it was just all encompassing. Yeah. It was so much work, and I left when I was on top too. There were sort of moves afoot in the back rooms. A change of regime, if you like. I won't name names, but the writing was on the wall.
But look up the date, folks.
The writing was on the wall that the people who had been at the station the longest, i.e. the senior members of staff, were going to be asked to leave. Right. So I left before I was asked to leave.
Before the name of your job was changed and advertised under that name.
And also I left on a high, which was great. And that the station was running really well. I left it in really good hands. Yeah. The highlights for me was certainly things like New Zealand Music Week, where we would have 25 to 30 live bands come through, and I got to choose who those people were going to be, and a lot of them were emerging talent that I'm really glad that I did. People like Frontline, which was David Dallas and 4130. People like the Decepticons, Red Eye Society.
Oh, that's right. You were PD through that.
There was a whole Aotearoa hip hop sort of this thing, and these were all groups that people hadn't heard of.
Renaissance.
But it was was it Renaissance? I mean, it was almost like a birth. There had been hip hop before that, but it was like.
Second Renaissance.
So many great guys. There was a group called Insomniacs, which was Tourette's, and the guy Jared, who started Break-In Records. Right. They were a 2-piece hip hop group called Insomniacs, but they were amazing. They were actually amazing. You never heard rappers like these guys.
Wow.
They were incredible. I put Insomniacs on the radio, and they only had like a shitty demo, but it's like it was one of those sort of Darcy Clay moments. A home
got
recording,
into the top 11,
and
top 10, top
boom,
10.
Exactly. I was really happy with all that hip hop that I was able to promote, and the whole Dawn Raid thing, and Dirty Records when that was happening, with Scribe and all of that, and of course sort of all the reggae bands. I mean, the very first Catch a Fire record. that went on, and the support I was able to give people like Salmonella Dub and Black Seeds and Fat Freddy's Drop, their first records, and all that kind of stuff. Really good, and then also seeing young guys come through, like people like P Money, who basically I first met as a 16 or 17-year-old, and remembering back to 1981 when I was that 16 or 17-year-old, and there's P Money making his own beats at home, raw beats, and then kind of moving on to being able to host the True School Hip Hop Show, and he's still a kid, and we had Nick D doing the drum and bass, and he was still a kid, and you had, you had Evan and Matt from Concord Dawn. They were kids.
Were they?
They were, dude.
I thought they were around my age. Anyway,
no, they were.
I like the sentiment of your riff.
No, they were definitely a whole lot younger than me. Anyway, maybe a little more than kids, but uni student age, maybe. But and just seeing their success and being able to sort of push those guys forward and just go, you guys have got something unique. Let's go with it. And
it's amazing to hear, and not unexpected either, to hear you still get just as excited about it, recalling it now.
Yeah.
It's fine. Some of the stories is that dedication to music. I was thinking about with P Money. I saw. I was reading something somewhere about Peter, or doesn't matter where it was, but he told a story about the True School. You might not even know this. Like, apparently he was so keen to come up and do it with those guys that he'd finished some shitty ass job he had, get public transport there, do the show, but he was
from Papakura. Yeah,
the bus back,
the furthest train stop away.
The last train or bus at the time. He'd miss as a result of doing the show, so he'd go and listen to a DJ somewhere in a club, and then he'd wait for 2 or 3 hours or whatever till the first one in the morning to get home. And I'm not meaning going out to party all night. I'm meaning, how can I do this show?
And I mean, he had to be safe. He couldn't be just loitering around the street. So he'd go down to a club until they closed,
and then wait somewhere, the poor guy, till the first.
No, that's absolutely true, and it was that passion,
And then, so where does because I haven't seen you in action in your day job, but I think it really suits you. And so how the heck did you because BFM's on the Auckland campus. How did you and AUT come to?
Well, it's a bit of a sad story, but it's a good story as well. I mean, like you said, my day job suits me. I like it. Again, I'm working with youth. I'm mentoring young people, and it's the same as my DJ gigs. I mean, I'm playing in bars and clubs to people in their 20s. So it's just like in my day job, I'm helping people in their 20s.
Do you ever see the crossover? I saw you at 2 a.m.
Oh, actually, I do. Not so much the students, but the staff.
Oh, yeah.
The other day I was talking to a lady from AUT Sports and Recreation, and she goes, "Oh, I saw your set at Splore. It was pretty good." So what happened was I finished up at BFM at the end of 2003, left on a high, like I said, got lots of really nice letters and messages from the DJs and people I'd worked with just going, "Oh, really sad to hear you're going, Dubby," and all of that, and it was lovely, and I thought, I'll be snapped up by the music industry. No problem. I'll get a job at Sony or Flying Nun or working for the Music Industry Commission or IMNZ.
Like the chimney sweeping industry, it kind of fell apart.
Suddenly record companies had no money in 2003. And I didn't get snapped up. Like, seriously, I spent about a year just chilling out because, like I said, I was definitely approaching burnout by the time I left BFM. And just looking around and asking people, and of course by then I had a lot of friends in the music industry because these were the people who were giving me new releases and demos and stuff every week. So I've been helping them out, putting songs on the radio for years. It's like, hey, help me out, I need a job. I'll even work in your storeroom. But the thing is, basically after a year, it hadn't happened. I hadn't landed that job doing sales
so to get a little bit down
at Warner's, and there was no space for me at Flying In, and the MIC already had the full complement of government subsidised workers, so it didn't happen. And now Psychoff is a sort of a theme that runs through, because when I was doing my radio show, he used to host the Hard, Fast and Heavy show, which was also on Monday nights, and it was always after my show. So for years and years, I would do my show, and then Psychoff and Troy would come on and do Hard, Fast and Heavy show. And at times, Sykoff worked at BFM. I think he worked at BFM sort of 3 times. Once he was a sales rep. One time he was the, promotions manager there.
One of those names I've never met, but I definitely know who you're talking about.
Simon Coffey. And then he worked at Auckland University for AUSA for quite a time. And he was the guy organising events and orientation gigs at AUSA. And he did that for a job. And then he ended up working at AUT, doing the same thing. He was the events manager for AUSM, which was the AUT Students Association. So he was there, working there, putting on orientation gigs. Perfect job for a guy who was a promoter like Sykoff and had this whole background in student radio and all of that. And he asked me, and he goes, have you found any work yet? I'm like, no. He goes, well, do you want to come and do some work for me? It's only 8 hours a week, and you'll be cooking sausages and putting up posters.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, no problems. I mean, I had DJ gigs, but you can't live on DJ gigs, So I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. 8 hours a week.
You can live on sausages.
And and bit by bit that gradually increased. Eventually Sykoff left, and I think someone else took over as events manager. But I worked it up to 10 hours a week cooking sausages, and then 15 hours a week, and eventually 20 hours a week. And after 5 years of cooking sausages,
5 years,
dude, from 2005 to 2010, I must have cooked 1 million sausages.
But how come I see students cooking the sausages now? Has the sausage cooking system changed?
No, they're not students. They're people who were doing the job I did.
They're sausage cookers.
Yeah.
Anyway.
They are. They're the official sausage cookers, bro. They are not students. They look like students, and they're probably studying at the same time, but and then
wow.
I know.
I had no idea.
I was the sausage guy. In fact, I was, I walked into a lift the other day. I think I was going to Radio New Zealand.
Hey, it's the sausage guy.
Yeah, this corporate dude in a suit was coming out of the lift in the Radio New Zealand building, and he saw me and he went, "It's the sausage guy." Because he'd remember every week he'd come and he'd get the sausage from me. So
is that the sad part of the story you
Well,
saying,
no, it's
that you
not.
just ended up doing...
I guess the sad part was that I couldn't get a job in the music industry because such a thing didn't exist.
After all that time cutting your teeth.
Yeah, exactly. In the year of 2004, there was no work for me. I possibly could have created my own job, but I didn't get a kind of music-related job, and that I ended up being the sausage guy for 8 hours a week.
Yeah. But that wasn't, I can say here now, I hope you're aware, it wasn't you, it was the fact that that's probably a pretty common story globally at that time.
Yeah, and to be honest, I actually really liked cooking sausages and putting up posters.
That's right.
And working for Sykoff. And then in 2010, they opened a new campus out in Manukau, and I got sent out there to run the office there, which is where I still am now.
So you went straight from sausages to running the office?
Yeah. But, I mean, I was given that as the hours increased, my responsibilities increased, so I was more and more involved in booking bands and doing orientation things, not just sausages. Sausages in addition to a lot of other things.
Yeah. So you struggle with cooking sausages at home now?
Well, this was the great thing, is once 2010 and they opened the new campus in Manukau, I didn't have to cook sausages anymore. They employed someone else to cook sausages, and I'm like, yes, no more sausages. So that was the happy part of the story.
And you're there now.
I'm there now.
What do you do on a day-to-day? Just to wrap up, what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
It's still only 30 hours a week. So it's like, it's not even a full-time job.
But hang on, but you do enough gigs a week that you probably don't want your whole life to be either working or DJing, do you? You must want some gaps in between.
Well, it's nice actually. I can go home, have a shower, have a sleep, have something to eat, and then go out and do a gig.
Yes.
So I've got the time to do that.
Okay, so it's...
but you've got to remember, it's still only, at 30 hours, I earn 75% of what an ordinary person earns. Okay. Because I'm only working 75% of the time. So I'm still pretty poor.
We're going to wrap we're going to wrap this up here. But okay, if you want to...
I do like my day job.
If you want to go down that route, buddy, I've studied 2010, 2011, 2012... 13, 14, 15. So 6 of the last 7 years I've studied at a postgraduate level. I just became a doctor at the beginning of last year.
Congratulations.
I don't have a full-time job. I'd love to have one.
Do AUT employ you?
I've got my first contract because someone's away on paternity leave, which is great. But the idea that I'd educate myself to this level and fall into a full-time job. By the way, disclaimer, this is not anything to do with my relationship with AUT. This is me,
Yes, yeah.
This is me talking about the reality of getting full-time employment these days.
Yeah.
Is like full-time staff are just a liability to everyone globally in this neoliberal freaking world, dude. So, yeah, I agree it's hard, but it's not you and your,
And the truth is,
it's not you and your sausage stees, brother.
No, and it's never been the money. I mean, if you think about
Yeah.
it, the best job I ever had in my life would be as program director at BFM. The money was peanuts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's never, the money is not the thing, is it? You know,
And it wasn't just 30 hours a week and you ended up burning out and people hassled you at gigs. Anyway, look, man, you're a great raconteur. Maybe like Mikey was keen on, we get you in for a part 2 sometime and you can just talk about whatever the heck you want. But thanks for...
oh, you're welcome. And as a disclaimer, no disrespect to Mikey. I love Mikey. When I see Mikey now, him and I have a good yarn, and our relationship at BFM was strictly professional, but as people, we really like each other.
I think you and I maturely and thoughtfully covered that topic, and I don't think you needed that disclaimer at the end, but thank you.